Great. Welcome to the TADSummit Serverless and Real-Time Communications panel discussion. Now, we have some excellent opinion pieces from the panelists. You definitely recommend you spend the time and look through those opinion pieces, ideally before this panel session, but it's okay afterwards. To find it, just go to the TADSummit EMEA Americas agenda and you'll find the link there associated with this panel session. So I'm just going to quickly run through some introductions. So Tim, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tim Panton. I'm the CTO at Pipe, and I've been doing real-time communications for a ridiculously long period of time.
Martin, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Martin Schönherr. I'm the founder of Automat. It's a software development company, and a good chunk of our clients are carriers and CPaaS providers. So we do develop software for the industry.
Excellent, thank you, Martin. Jason, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm the founder of 418.dev. I'm a Google Cloud certified architect. I specialize in serverless, and I've been working in telecoms for about 25 years.
Excellent, thank you for joining us. Simon, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Simon Woodhead, founder of Simwood, a carrier in the US and the UK.
Sebastian, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, this is Sebastian. I'm with Deutsche Telekom Engineering, and I'm an architect in the international network infrastructure team with focus on voice, programmable communications, and voice moving to the cloud.
Excellent, thank you, Sebastian. And last but definitely not least, João, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is João. I'm founder and CTO at GoContact. We work in the contact center space, working with telecoms in the last 10 years.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So let's just get straight down to the questions. As I said, I'm going to pick on Tim first. So this is to everybody else. Do you agree with Tim's view that the life cycle of serverless functions is short, max 9 minutes, which limits its ability to support real-time communications because of the longer session times? So open to anybody, please jump in.
Okay, I'll start with that because that's something, if you're using something like Cloud Functions, then Cloud Functions, I believe, have now been extended. You can run them for around 15 minutes. However, there's a technology called Knative, which is serverless containers. It's based on Kubernetes, and some of the providers, particularly Google, have something called Cloud Run. And Cloud Run runs serverless containers in a managed environment. And those containers you can run up to an hour. Now, an hour is probably good for 95% of calls, but still doesn't fit that use case where you want to have a call that might last a couple of hours.
Exactly. Anything from anybody else on the panel?
Well, I think Jason pretty much covered it, but you know, it's still a feature. To be honest, I think you know, AWS and Google designed the basic serverless function to be run this way. It serves a specific purpose. It also lets you know that you should run short-lived stuff on those platforms. So it's a clear indication on or what you should do rather than what you should try and not to do.
Exactly. No, that's great. Now, another issue that was brought up is the limited set of functions that's available with serverless today. Now, of course, that's going to change. It's going to improve. Does that have an impact on real-time communications?
If I can jump in again,
go for it, Jason.
That's something where Knative really helps, because unlike Cloud Functions, where you're simply running a piece of code in somebody else's Linux environment, with Knative and Cloud Run, you can effectively specify a container which could contain anything like Tractio, Camelio, Asterisk, and you can package all of that into a container. The issue you come to is that generally these containers can accept one input, and where you're using an input, let's say, for example, for the transport layer, it then becomes difficult to connect the media layer for doing bridging, and indeed connecting that to another container that might be hosting the other party within the call.
Gotcha. Okay. So that sort of leads me on in terms of, what have been people's experiences in using sort of VoIP SIP servers in containers? So sort of, because we've got sort of Knative there, sort of jumping up a little bit to sort of broaden the sort of problem space. I know quite a few people here have been working on cloud and RTC. What have been people's experiences there?
I'm just going to track back slightly back
Yeah, go for it,
to serverless and functions, just to, and actually answer that question, which is that the most useful thing I've done with serverless in the RTC world is testing. You can build up, certainly for the WebRTC world, you can build up a huge stack of machines running virtual Chrome that will hit your service as hard as you like. And provided, as I say, you keep the duration of the test down, you can hit it really hard without actually having to have any kind of provisioned equipment at all. And that for me personally, particularly in development cycles, has been great. I can test like, a load of 100 things turning up on my service with a click of a button, and somewhere out in Google's cloud, all of these things get provisioned and run and things happen and whatever. And I don't care. It was one HTTP post and it was done.
Yeah.
So that's actually, that for me, that's the kind of the promise of serverless. When it gets down to things that you can't constrain that lifespan and where you do care about the state, it gets much more complicated, which is, I guess, what we're really going to talk about.
Exactly. And that was the point that in your opinion piece, Martin, you mentioned in terms of as a developer for development and testing, it's quite natural to use serverless, while once we move into operations, it gets a little bit more complex.
Yes, well, basically, I can just repeat what Tim said.
Yeah.
We've been using Lambda functions for quite a while. As long as they're there actually for development and testing, it's just a natural thing to the developers, because they do a lot of development and testing on localhost.
Mm-hmm.
And now they can just push it to somewhere, and it's just the same thing. It's the same kind of job as you would do on localhost.
Yeah.
You just skip all the dependencies, you try what you've done, and then it's gone again. And as well, it's cheap, right? It's easy and cheap. So it's really nice. So yes and yes. And the other thing, maybe you just asked with containers, it's difficult to, like, we had a couple of comments here with containers and serverless. So it's kind of an evolution, right?
Yes.
And how much of a complex job you do in what we call DevOps, right? So in the past, well, not in the past, today with containers and Kubernetes and all the tool chain you get with containerization, this is already now in the quality maturity actually, where you can actually operate things. And we did, and that was what I did together in the past, kind of a couple of years ago with Sebastian, Deutsche Telekom. We ran a whole communication platform in AWS with containers. It was a pain in the ass at the beginning, but at the end of the day, it was really nice. And so the same now with this paradigm. I think we're still in the early phase.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not good enough for like complicated operations, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes with nice tools usually. Exactly. And the ecosystem providers, whether it's Google, Microsoft, or Amazon, they provide nice tools, and the community actually pump it with more tools. So from that perspective, I guess it will take a while, as it always took, right? But then we might even be there. If it's meaningful, maybe at the end of the day, it's not meaningful, but I don't know about communication, like especially real-time communication.
Yeah.
There might be some specifics, then it might not match with what the cloud providers provide.
Understood. Now, Simon, you brought up the approach that you're taking, sort of hybrid from bare metal through containers to using serverless where appropriate. And you gave some great use cases for serverless. And one of the areas you mentioned is running sort of artificial intelligence. So where you're adding AI into communications. Now, I think it's clear from the discussion so far in the panel that for dev and for testing, serverless makes complete sense. while there's a bigger question mark over operations, now some of the functions within there possibly. So I'm just interested in your perspective, Simon.
Yeah, can I just go back a stage and work up to that? So I was going to jump in on your previous question when you asked about experience with containers. So we've been fully containerized for, off the top of my head, somewhere between 5 and 7 years for every aspect of the stack, and that includes things that are handling media. Yep. That's evolved. It started off with Docker. We're now having a rolling sort of migration to Kubernetes.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's the same. And I agree with everything everybody else has said about the tooling and the development cycle. But you absolutely can run production stuff in containers, including RTC.
Yeah.
The challenges haven't really improved though. Particularly around networking. Now we ended up writing our own network stack so that we could make a container effectively a first-class citizen on the network with its own IP address and a full range of ports. And we used BGP to announce that container's existence up into the network. I think it was beautiful, but everybody that's joined the business since thinks it's an aberration and needs replacing. But it served us well nevertheless. But that problem still exists. Even on Kubernetes, if you want to access all 65,000 ports, you're effectively using host networking. You're adding a new IP address to on the host, or you're getting into kind of scary and dirty means of passing those through to the container. So to your new point, I don't see, although we've been fairly early on with some of this stuff, I see no burning need or burning imperative for us to migrate to serverless with anything RTP related, anything media.
Where it is relevant for us is in functions where we need hyperscale, where we use the tin on net. Is my audio okay?
Yeah, it switched. So I think
it's all right. My earpiece just switched off. So I'm on the internal mic now. Is where we need hyperscale beyond
Simon
the resources
that we have on net. So
Simon.
Now it's decided to turn itself on again.
Yeah,
so I gave it.
You went really, really quiet and then came back again with a burst.
Yeah, it's because I took my earpiece out because it stopped working. Then it decided to work again while it was on the side there. So yeah, sorry about that. So what I was essentially saying is where serverless is relevant for us is where we need to go beyond the scale that we have on net in a hybrid architecture. And the examples I gave in my piece at the start were some of the queries that I've always wanted to run in this business around price elasticity and that kind of thing that just became a moving feat of impossibility to do on net, but serverless just blew me away in terms of its capability to spin up 100,000 CPUs and answer the question in sort of 15-20 seconds. But moving from there towards RTC, I do see application in the support services where you need to integrate functions to your application, but not necessarily have them on net.
Gotcha.
And you talk about translation, sentiment analysis, all of that type of thing. I could see being kind of applications presented serverlessly for consumption elsewhere.
Cool. That's clear. Excellent. So one of the issues now, what I really liked about Sebastian's opinion was explaining the importance of planning around the cycle and the challenges that he sees in, for example, financial planning and some of the challenges that brings in just not even serverless, just the move to containerization. So I guess I'm just interested, maybe not in Sebastian's opinion, but, particularly Simon, because yes, you're a technology company, but you're also a telco. How do you avoid those financial planning issues? Is it purely a matter of scale compared to Deutsche Telekom, or do you have a fundamentally different process that enables you 5 to 7 years ago to be, basically containerizing, while for Deutsche Telekom, it's still part of the journey?
So I tend to view these technology evolutions as cost optimization.
Okay.
If we go back, VMs replaced magic boxes, containers replaced VMs. At each stage of that cycle, you could potentially redeploy the same hardware or equivalent hardware and get more out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That gets slightly convoluted when you look at the cloud. Because me myself, whenever I looked at AWS back in the day, I used to get cross that they price things by the hour. Why don't they just give me a monthly rate? And of course, the reason is because you're not supposed to run it for the whole month as you would a VM. And if you work it out on that basis, it looks scarily expensive. And it's sad and a little annoying that some of these subscriptions that you see available on AWS are designed around that deployment model. You build it once, you run it forever, and you pay them a fortune for having it. You may as well have that on net. Mm-hmm. But used properly, and serverless is the extreme implementation of this. Cloud and serverless should save money because you're only paying for what you use. So again, we've got that iteration that is optimizing cost.
Exactly. No, that's a good point. Now, one of the points that Joao brought up in his piece is, everybody here is in the technology business, running technology companies. To attract developers, you have to be working in fashionable technologies. And the three brands that we've mentioned, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they spend hundreds of millions on developer marketing and education. So if we want to hire developers, you have to be working on technologies they're going to be interested in. So serverless is necessary to attract talent. So given what we're stating is it has a role, particular functions, as part of a hybrid architecture, but for the core RTC, because of how it's designed, all the basically band-aids you've got to put around it to get it to run Camellio or to run a Asterix, it's not really sort of the core of the business. I'm just interested in people's views. How is the technology company? Can you make serverless part of your business so that you can attract and retain talent?
If I can just comment on my own point, even to expand it, because I just had a very interesting talk with AWS guys last couple of days, and I keep thinking that it's still very, very early in the cloud adoption space, but this new wave of developers, people that today have between 20 and 25 years of age, this is the new reality, right? So for us, older guys, we are hybrids, in my opinion. So we are flexible enough, and we tend to view things like, what is the best case scenario to solve my problem? But this is because we grew up as developers in a time where you were forced to take these kind of decisions, and you had a limitation on resources, right? With cloud computing, that limitation goes away, and it comes with an upside that is the ease of use. Okay, so you don't need to understand about databases, but you also don't need to understand how to write a good query. So that's another layer, right?
Yes.
So you don't go back, right, to learning how to write a good query, because A, you have the compute resources, and B, I mentioned the Firebase case. Yeah. You can't actually write a query on Firestorm or on Firestore that is not efficient. Okay, so the platform tells you this query can't be run because you are missing an index on this key. Okay, and they don't run the query. Okay, yeah. So this is something that all developers needed to learn, and now new developers get this right out of the box. And the way I see is that these companies, especially the big ones, because they do spend a lot of money on educating, right? they are defining the new platforms in a way that someday it will be the case that if you want to stay relevant as a company, you need to use their technology. And this is true on a multiple of levels. My company is totally private. We have no venture capital. And, you know, we've been approached in the past. And one of the things VC guys tend to say is, you should definitely run on AWS, because if you want to get invested, which to be honest, I don't, but you know, they keep saying this, if you want to get invested, you need to be on the AWS, you need to be on Google, you need to be on Azure, because you know, it's too hard to explain to a VC that it's better to run your own data centers, right? So these are, you know, these are forces that are in place that, you know, are totally out of the technology scope. So it's not technical decisions, right? It's a business decision.
Exactly.
And if you expand this over time, I think it takes us to a place where this is not a choice, right? So, to be honest, the platforms that we run these days, you know, all media platforms that are stable in the market are monolith applications. So like Simon described, we needed to change, you know, we kept the engine, but we needed to change the whole car to fit it into a container. You know, I've been there, done that as well. You know, it's still, it's not the same technology. It runs on a container. It has its own set of new problems. You probably can't get that much help from the community, so the open source, you know, value drops as well. So there's a lot of forces here at play as well. So in my mind, moving forward with the advancements in cloud computing, you need to see a new type of communications platform arise, one that is first based on microservices, and then it has the kind of architecture that can take advantage of these technologies, like spin up processing units, do something like, for example, record a call and then die afterwards. You know, like a session-based computing platform, something around that. You know, that it's not exactly what we have today, and that is the main challenge, right?
Yeah, excellent points, Joe.
Yeah,
Tim, Martin, Simon, yeah.
I agree with that entirely. Apart from the VC's view, I think that's plain wrong and short-sighted. But yeah, it's about architecting your application in the right way, and if you do so, cloud and serverless becomes a tool for the job. The danger is that you do it the other way around, and you get yourself locked into an ecosystem and frankly doing things in a crazily inefficient way. I've given talks before about the fact that why are we only solving problems at layer 7? You know, when there's layers 1 to 6 that have each gone through their own journey and evolution and could probably help us solve certain problems, particularly around security, that kind of thing, far better than doing everything at layer 7. But in a cloud world, you're kind of conditioned to use the tools of that particular ecosystem. So you've got to resist getting hooked into that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point in terms of the architecting of the solution. Tim, Martin, any comments on?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's like we've sort of been talking about using this to scale up and kind of touched on the idea of scaling down, but it turns out that in most cases, scaling down is way, way harder than scaling up. You know, and it's architected, the cloud is to some extent architected to be like that. But RTC makes that even more difficult. We all have a mutual friend who runs a very large video conferencing service who spent a large chunk of the beginning of this year trying to work out how to kill off instances that had like two people in a room, and that was holding an entire kind of AWS instance in the air. And that if that conference went on for a few days, well, he was stuck with it. And he would have thousands of these kind of zombie servers loafing around, costing him money. And getting out of that situation with RTC is actually surprisingly difficult. And I think that's one of the kind of architectural challenges that you're all facing. Joyfully I'm not, because I do things at the edge, but you know.
Which is a very nice transition, Tim, because in your opinion piece, but also in Sebastian's opinion piece, and Joe referred to it as he was wrapping up, is as we're architecting this, you know, will RTC possibly skip serverless and move to a more decentralized, event-driven stack using HTTP3, RIP? This is looking forward now into the future. So rather than, because I think we've done the serverless piece and its role today and the importance of how you architect your platform. Now let's look to the future and see, you know, because Sebastian brought up the issue that by the time we as a telco get ready for serverless, the world could be different. So I'm just interested in everybody's views around how this could look moving forward.
Well, yes, I think it's definitely technically possible, but the biggest point here, I think, is around laws, politics, and use cases as well. You do have a lot of use cases where you need a server. But you know, for the mainstream use case in telecoms, like two people speaking to each other, it's totally possible. There are some, you know, regulatory issues with this, and we've seen these new instant messaging platforms coming up with full encryption end to end. At least, you know, that's what their developers say it is. Those kind of platforms, and I think it was Apple that fought a very big legal battle in the US not to open up instant messaging logs. Yeah. So these are the types of things that, you know, big telecom is going to have to face if they want to move you know, this kind of responsibility to the edge. I'm not sure if you know, what's the upside technically on this. I think this is part of a pattern that we see that emerges over time. You push computing to the edge, and then you bring it back to the core, and then you push it to the edge again. And this pushes, you know, for technology advances in the endpoint and on the server. And, you know, this is right now, I think we are seeing concentration again, but we are now discussing pushing stuff back to the edge because, you know, personal computers are now so powerful, smartphones, etc., until it gets to a point where it's slow again. So you need to push it back to data centers. So, but you know, there's law issues around this that I think we will need to see maybe a couple of decades before we can actually address them. You know, laws tend to move much slower than technology.
I think that and I said this in the opinion piece, I think that the driving force for this is actually going to be ecology. I think that the data center growth, power consumption growth can't continue. And so just saying, hey, we'll throw more AI into the data center and you know, we can use a whole European country's worth of power, just like, you know, putting funny hats on something. That isn't going to, we're not going to be able to carry on doing that. And it is totally unnecessary. I mean, you know, the GPUs on your smartphone are plenty capable of doing that stuff. And in fact, it's probably quicker and more accurate done locally. So I think there's going to be an ecological and a cost driver in terms of the energy consumption that will drive this stuff out to the edge. And I think that's going to happen a lot faster than in 20 years. I certainly hope it will, because if not, we're in deep trouble.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent point, Tim.
Well, I need to raise a question here. A follow-up question is that, do you think we may be taxed in the future as a software company because we do funny hats instead of you know, actually useful stuff? So if you're wasting energy doing, you know, augmented reality and you know, that it's just funny, nothing else. is it possible that your company pays a higher tax than other company that is doing more useful stuff with that energy? You know, it's an interesting question.
You already see it to some extent in terms of battery life on like, you know, the real discipline here is what does this do to my battery life on my phone? You know, and we'll start to see that those sorts of disciplines, those sorts of user choices permeate back into the data center. I mean, it's already true that, you know, a large part of your bill is power.
The other issue you've got with moving stuff to the edge is thermal throttling. This is something I found with both mobile devices and tablets. Is you can run some great applications, and you can do machine learning. So you could do speech to text, various transcoding, etc. on the device. But when the CPU is running at maximum capacity, you just can't dissipate that much heat from a handheld mobile phone, which is one of the reasons why mobile phones tend to typically have a number of cores, some of which are big, some are little. And the big cores spring into action when a user taps on the screen, just to give you that instant response. And then the smaller cores take over, and the function carries on running gently in the background once the user interaction has happened. So my concern, Tim, is that moving stuff to the edge is great, but I feel that as well as battery power, you can't dissipate that much heat from a handheld device.
I think that's somewhat true, but I think if you look at the GPUs and what you can do with your iPhone 12 on a GPU, I think, you know, though they outperform a slice of server on a fairly regular basis. And it's only the forced cooling that lets the server get away with it. And that is a huge environmental cost. So I think there's totally take your point, but I think the discipline that comes with what does this battery life do to the battery life of my phone is going to permeate deeper into the stack. And those sorts of things you're going to have to start thinking about again.
Yeah. And I think that's
one aspect when we look at this that I also brought up shortly is that I think it's like already quite advanced to talk about this kind of shift to the end device. If you think of power, and if you think how carriers built their platform with levels of redundancy and the level of unused capacities in the past, and we're still doing this. And by carriers, I should say, because Simon is, I should say, legacy incumbents as us, not modern carriers such as Simwood. So the way we used to build our platform, we still do, is actually, you know, with a certain level of redundancy and a certain level of over provisioning and a certain level of all the time provisioning that consumes so much power by not being used at all, right? And if we manage already to drive the level of utilization higher, be that in a model that where we use the public cloud to augment kind of spikes, and to cover the calls, let's say, that we don't have provisioned on dedicated hardware, be it for standby scenarios where we just say, well, we have some redundant capacity, so to take kind of over and to have a bit more time from the moment we detect outages to provisioning stuff, but at least, and even if it's a statically provisioned cloud that you can run up if you really, like, as a human, notice that you need it, but the potential to bring it up when we need and to not have to operate it 24/7 and to own it on one hand and to operate it is quite fundamental. And if you look at the power consumption of carriers such as us, I think, I don't know, in number Germany, we're, I think, something around number 3 or something like in the list of our data centers consuming energy. I've learned it recently, don't recall the exact figure, but I was quite surprised. I think already starting there and getting started with the cloud, it's already something where we can achieve so much by just increasing utilization. Of course, we need to deal with the facts again that this trade-off, you need to kind of factor in the bill in the end, because what you have is funny things such as when you run a voice minute on a hardware that you procured, it's basically just a voice minute. When you run it on an AWS function or on an AWS component you bring up shortly, it makes that minute actually more expensive because it's something you consume on demand. So that's why you want to utilize, or to very high level, the hardware that you own, right? And you want to only, so this trade-off, this is a very complex thing. I've looked into that, and I've in the projects I'm in, it's really an interesting dilemma you're facing, right? And what is the right point? But I think starting there and getting already from an N-X redundancy for peak capacity to a point where you get under normal load, you have a buffer of 10%. This would already be such an, in one data center, this would already be such an immense saving of the factor, I don't know, several magnitudes over what you actually never use as hardware. And from that moment on, you can optimize. And I think be it cloud computing, be it containers or serverless in the end, for us big carriers, the savings potential on energy and also on cost is actually quite humongous when we start with these very, very basic questions, right? Whether in the end we use the inbuilt CPU for a VPA transcoding, or we use the GPU for that, or we do it server side. I think this is a question that's already in the advanced ecosystem of RTC discussed, and I find it very interesting. And in the end, I also shortly refer to it. But I think for carriers, there's so much more potential, really, just in the basics that they haven't looked at, or that they slowly start to look at. That can lead to fundamental savings, and also from the energy perspective and cost perspective, something that's really worth investigating, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Simon, you were talking about that.
Yeah, so Sebastian makes the point I did in my piece about the future is really hybrid, and that's what we're doing at Simwood. But to get to that, we've got to have a common technology stack, be it in the cloud or be it on net. Yeah. So at the moment, for redundancy, we'll have triple the hardware provision of our peak call volume plus a bit for growth. If actually we can get ourselves to a position where we can take the peaks on public cloud or somewhere else, then we can actually start running, rather than 30% utilization, we can push that up to perhaps 70, 80, 90. So we're getting more out of the equipment that's there. Yes, we're saving on power. Yes, we're saving on cooling, but that's a slightly disingenuous argument, because when it's in the cloud, it's just somebody else's computer. So that's sitting there burning power and requiring cooling at the same time. Potentially more, because he's got to sit there and wait for me to want to use it while I'm also using my own that's on net. I mean, Tim's point about stuff moving to the edge, and whether you define the edge as a smartphone, or whether you define the edge as a cell tower, or whether you just define the edge as a regional cache somewhere in that city, it's still all moving closer to the user. But in respect of RTC, I think you're really asking us what the future of the industry is. And I want to quote Dean Bubley here, where sometime 1066 or whatever it was, I saw him speak. It was he said, voice is no longer a service, it's a feature. And if you look at what Sebastian's company and my company do, if you were starting from scratch in 2020, neither of us would be necessary. What we really provide is access to the largest social network on the planet, namely the PSTN, with contact discovery and the ability to call anybody else anywhere on the planet, and monetization. Yeah. Plus the ability for government to listen in on phone calls now and again. That's really what we exist for. And RTC as a feature rather than a service is moving more peer-to-peer anyway, yes, as it becomes embedded within, for example, applications. So rather than your Uber driver ringing you on your mobile phone, it's Uber app to Uber app. It's naturally moving peer-to-peer to the edge and away from this centralized architecture anyway. Mm-hmm. The piece that remains to be solved, of course, is that replacement social network that isn't owned by Facebook.
Absolutely. No, this has been a great panel discussion. I think, in terms of defining the role for serverless, recognizing that you're all technology companies, so you have no choice to be relevant. You have to have that as part of the hybrid solution that's there. I think that the piece that we haven't really sort of opened up, and I'm thinking is most probably a separate discussion to this, is looking at a more decentralized, event-driven architecture. I mean, I'm with Tim personally in terms of the ecological impact, and I think regulation can help drive that adoption. But because as soon as you talk about regulation, it's years upon years cycles. And
can I give you an anecdote on power consumption? So we had to do a response to our regulator on the future of the voice industry the other week, and we were anticipating BT's BT making the case for keeping all their TDM gear switched on and everybody else having to keep TDM gear switched on to interface with them. So we could each be IP, but we had to have this barrier in the market. So we looked at power consumption, and I could be wrong on the decimal, but I seem to, it was either 1/4 or 0.5% of the UK's power consumption was our former incumbent telco that now has a 39% market share. So you can multiply that up, and we're into a couple of % of the country's power consumption going on effectively voice and internet access.
Yes. Oh yeah. And telcos are in a lot of Asian countries one of the largest power consumers. And Sebastian already meant Deutsche Telekom is number 3. In some, African countries, the telcos
maybe we're high up, number 3. But
sorry,
yeah.
No. You're high up there, but I can say that there are other telcos that are even higher up in terms of power consumption. So it is a pressing issue, whether it's regulation or economics. I think this future decentralized architecture, I think, is another discussion. And really, when we have that one, we should be bringing Matthew and Amandine into that discussion as well. But cool.
Maybe one point though on mentioning we all technology companies. I wouldn't really say that we are a real technology company. We're rather running technology, and I think there one thing I noticed is that I've seen when we did what I mentioned in the recent also RFQ on a new intercarrier voice platform. I've seen a lot of traditional vendors actually accommodate on cloud, accommodate on having features inbuilt for scaling their features. Some very complex with a lot of VMs where you really see just one-to-one mapping of legacy technology, but some also really smart solutions. What I'm really missing and is that kind of advances in the open source community, right? So in 2007, when I was back in Slovak Telecom, we've replaced the BroadSoft installment with an OpenSIPs. So we did open source. We did it ourselves. We were convinced we can do it. And in the end, we brought it to productions, and the ops team is running a very stable platform, more stable than some of the rest. But when I was recently looking into some test deployment that I did in an automated way on AWS, Terraform, Ansible, and so on, setting up Chameleon, RTP engine, all the stuff that you would use it. What I noticed is that there's very few stuff, very little stuff on how to move that into containers and how to really scale that. And I was also surprised in the latest Chameleon workshop I think we attended a year ago or 2 years ago, where it seemed containers was really something, and Kubernetes, that people get excited about. And it was this time when with Martin, we've ran this stuff kind of in production, if you wish. So it's really something where I feel, I don't know, maybe your experience is different, but Simon, you mentioned it, right? You yourself put a lot of effort in getting there eventually. I don't see that much happen actually in the communities when it comes to, I don't know, I don't have an image, for example, like container image I could take and deploy on AWS that has a ECS integration for Chameleon and RTP engine, right? I did need to do that kind of myself, and I'm wondering what your experiences are, if that is something where once new companies would come in, or once these new approaches would come, and they would just have an easy to use stack, maybe would be very fast in finding people that would take that up, rather the old folks that used open source software that optimized that, but where we don't see in the previous generation of open source software not really any advances. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think this is also at least something I've personally noticed, because I cannot really recommend going to containers and all this stuff if I'm not convinced myself, right? And it's the case is harder to make for that, because you don't find many advocates will still say, we run it at the last TADSummit, Alan, you remember also, many said we run it either standalone hardware or on VMs. So I wonder what your thoughts on that
are. Tim, Simon, any comments?
I don't think that's necessarily a new problem. It's no different to how do I do HA with Asterisk in 2005. It was a dark art that a few people had worked out themselves and didn't want to share, that wasn't relevant for the community developers as a problem to solve. So went as this kind of undocumented thing that a few people know. And I think it's just a continuance of that. And it's, the root cause of that is one of the, the weaknesses and unresolved problems with, with open source. Love it as I do, and all the positives. That's one particular aspect that isn't as it ideally would be yet.
I think maybe you're looking in the wrong place, Sebastian, or for the wrong thing. I don't think you will I think you'll find better containerized solutions for like WebRTC SFUs than you will for Asterisk or Camellia. It fits the paradigm better, and you know, going back to what people want to work on, people want to work on a Node.js, you know, WebRTC thing. They don't want to be going back and taking. I mean, some people want to work on Asterisk code, but it's a smaller and smaller community over time. So I think when you do see that evolution, it'll be around newer engines and not older ones.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Tim. Well done.
Good. To sort of join this up, I'm not sure if I'll regret saying this out loud as the business idea of the decade, or whether somebody's already done it and I'm kind of blind to it. Either way, I look at all. But coming back to serverless and coming back to this whole problem, I kind of see the future, and an open source plays into this as well, where serverless, rather than a shop front for, say, Amazon's solutions to problems, becomes more App Store like. You know, so Jason, for example, could put up a serverless endpoint on the AWS architecture to solve a particular problem, I don't know, transcoding, that developers could integrate on a kind of pay-per-use basis that he participates in. Very much like the subscriptions that AWS do on virtual machines, but in a consumer-oriented kind of way. And that sort of pulls the rug from under the feet of the likes of, you know, Twilio and the original geeks. You know, and actually is a far nicer model, I think, going forwards.
I have I'm sure you've seen it, that Microsoft with Azure and Amazon anyways, they are going to provide calling, right? And they do it in a way that, I mean, I have the discussion, and I liked what Giles was saying, with my developers. They just look at it and say, you know, they would never ever think about zip, right? Zip is like 20 years ago. They look into the description and say, what am I, why should I know about the state of a call, right? I don't care. And then WebRTC already is old, but that's what they still kind of accept as technology to do calling, right? But everything else is legacy. And you see what you discussed here is basically, it shows its legacy. Some of the, like MDocs, is still selling hardware. They're still selling hardware with their solutions. I mean, go there and ask for a software-only solution. I mean, they have it now, but it's recently actually they introduced it, that they sell you software, right? So I would say they even, like the cloud providers, as we call them today, they even go up the chain, right? And however they do operate this internally, right? Whether they do like this ad hoc provisioning as they do in serverless, and the black box. As soon as they get to the what's called CPaaS environment, they might not do it the same way as Twilio and the like do, because they have built their whole business model around it, and they're very good in the execution technically via the APIs and SDKs. But if I read the news from Amazon and Google and Microsoft actually just came up with something recently, right? And I think that might even another layer of abstraction in our specific discussion here for telecommunications, that as soon as those guys provide a function, right? It's called a function that you could treat as just another interface that provides you, however, right, with the feature that you need. And that I would say it's maybe the way to look at it. We look into Amazon and we think they provide us hosting, right? But the way they provide us hosting, which of course at the end of the day is data centers and machines, they already provide it in a way that a developer actually can consume it as a developer would consume many other things too. And now if they go up the ladder, why would we care about whether it's serverless or in a virtual machine, or whether it's using Linux containers with Kubernetes to manage the containers, as long as they provide us a feature we need for an application, whatever the service is, right? What you mentioned. I think this is going to be the next. We might even don't think about serverless in the operations perspective, if those guys come up with scaling communication features or functions, they call it function today because they only give you hosting as a function. But as soon as they give you a feature as a function, and this is a communication feature like a call or a message or whatever, and that is working with the ecosystems of the smartphones where most of the communication actually happens, I guess then it takes a little glue in the middle, but then we just get away from 5 times 9. Like I'm sure Sebastian still discusses this concept, right, of security compliance and over provisioning, crazy over provisioning. But as soon as they provide you on a global scale the function, right, of RESTful API or however they do it, I'm sure they do it in a state-of-the-art way. Then we stop thinking about Kamaio, Asterisk, or any other legacy system, I guess. And that will change, I guess, big time. And maybe we are all old enough to not care about this anymore. Maybe Zhao and Sebastian, these guys are at least look longer. I guess basically really the question is, what is the service which people use in the future to communicate? And if 80% of that way of doing communication comes out of some black box function, well, then we don't even discuss whether it's called serverless or not. It just comes out of a plug, right? And that's it. So it will cost some money, of course, right? And it comes from electricity and the company that provides it because they want to make money. But as a matter of fact, I think it's even getting more that direction. And as long as old guys like us are here, we try to do it ourselves and think about running our own service or renting some service or functions. I guess they provide these products. But if I talk to the developers are 28, not 25, basically, but it's basically pretty much it, right? They would already ask why we wouldn't use Twilio, and even better, the guys that are providing us with global scaling solutions today. So I don't know. It's a question of time, I guess, and it will evolve into that direction. And I quite like what Zhao did in the movie, like this evolution with different aspects. We're all in this, right? Do we have any option? Basically, it's a good question. I think I'm easy because I only develop. I do the service, right? I have to keep up with this expertise thing with the new stuff. But it's actually, as a matter of fact, do we have a choice? Maybe in a niche we have a choice, right? But like in the mid future, in some years, I'm sure it will not be called serverless anymore. Then they will, on base of this technology, they will just provide whatever we need, and then we can consume it from a plug, right?
Martin, if I can add to your point, I think you are totally correct. I think voice is too important for that not to happen. I think it's if we were sitting here speaking about a more or a less important technology, I think it might take us a while, but voice is so important. And we are in my opinion, we are right now in a turning point where these big companies take a special interest in voice, because we will see an explosion of voice activated devices in the short term. And this is mostly due to machine learning and speech recognition, right? One of the services my company provides is we hook your contact center up to Dialogflow and Google Speech. And one of the early features available in Dialogflow was the phone gateway. Google has a special interest in enabling inbound phone calls to that service, and Amazon has rolled out Amazon Connect, and now Microsoft is also rolling out. And phone calls will go from being the best way two people could communicate without physical interaction, to being a source of information. And this is something new, you know, and this is something that happens to all of us. So millions of calls go through our platforms, but that information is unavailable to us. And you know, thank God it is this way. But you know, right now, and I think for the first time, there's a scalable technology to extract information from those conversations. And you know, regulatory issues aside, this is something that is very interesting for companies that have the scale to be able to do anything with this information. So in my mind, I think we will see these companies investing more and more and more in voice channels. You know, phone calls is just a piece of it. You know, handheld devices, you know, home appliances, cars, whatever. Voice is the natural way people interact, you know, so typing, messaging, chat, etc. That's all very new. You know, voice has hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. So, you know, as long as voice is easy, people tend to use voice. So I see this as accelerating very, very rapidly in the future.
Excellent. No, thank you so much, Cher. We are coming up on time. So this went on longer than I was anticipating, but I think it was a really great discussion, especially towards the end, where we were looking beyond just sort of techie geeky stuff to basically just, you know, the way I look at it in terms of what Martin said is just further abstraction for developers. So it just gets easier and easier to add in something which is so damn complex as voice. Yeah, which, let's face it, for the last 20, 30 years has kept us basically sort of banging our heads against the wall because of that damn complexity. But again, what I'd like to do is to thank every one of the panelists. Great job. Thank you so much for your time. And I think we'll be carrying on this discussion into another panel session next year for certain. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.